Hey everyone, we are excited to launch the Brightminds subscription. Unlimited access to all of our CE courses, webinars, and expert speakers all in one place.
And for a limited time for the month of December, you can get 50% off. Normally $299 a year, now just $149 for your first year.
That's unlimited CE on your schedule for half price.
Head over to psychedpractice.com and click sign up, and the discount is already applied. We look forward to seeing you there. And as always, be well, stay psyched. This episode of the Psyched to Practice podcast is sponsored by PAR, where psychological assessments meet innovation.
PAR has been the gold standard in the industry for over 45 years and has empowered professionals in education, healthcare, private practice, and research with trusted tools and cutting-edge solutions.
Discover more at parinc.com. Again, that is parinc.com. Creating connections, changing lives.
Welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm Ray Christner, and with me,
Paul Wagner.
Thank you for listening this week, and we're excited to revisit a topic that we have talked about before and have had some other people on, but a little bit about social media and working with teens and parents.
Yeah, no, we had a great conversation with Kelly McCullough. She really, I think, took the topic, and again, it's familiar, but she made it approachable in a way, whether you're talking with teens in the therapy office or if you're talking with parents or both, trying to advocate for just improving awareness of what social media does, what it takes from us, what it, the influence on depression, anxiety, the influence on sleep, and, the cost and consequence of the time it takes up. So many great topics we were able to get into here for today.
Yeah, I think this is a topic, it doesn't matter where we're practicing, right? I mean, if you're in an outpatient, if you're in a school, if you probably, I would say even pediatricians out there who are, in their offices, the idea of excessive media and device use, it's there. And I think what I appreciated about Kelly was that she really kept this practical, right? It was just these like little tidbits that if we all kind of keep in mind, we can help drive the content and also provide some skills and lifestyle changes that, not only help with media and device use, but even the idea of how it impacts sleep, how it impacts activity level, all of these other things. I think anytime we can take a complex topic and talk about some simple tips, it's a home run. So I appreciated what she was able to share with us today.
And those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Kelly, who is an LCSW, and she's also the founder of La Jolla Therapy Center. It's a group practice in San Diego, California. And her team at La Jolla specialize in using CBT and ERP to treat anxiety, specific phobias, and OCD with kids and teens. And Kelly is obsessed with ongoing learning and has received extensive psychotherapy training by the psychiatry and psychology departments at the University of California, University of San Diego, and Rady's Children's Hospital, San Diego. She holds certifications in trauma-focused CBT and parent-child interaction therapy, as well as individualized mental health interventions for ASD, as well as CADRE. And, just a wealth of information, and, hoping we're able to have her back on the podcast here soon.
And for those of you listening, if you have thoughts or further conversation, I know we're talking about social media, but check us out on social media.
And with that, we hope you enjoy this Practice in Action episode, Turning Teens Towards Social Media Literacy.
Kelly, thanks so much for joining us on the Psyched to Practice podcast. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Oh my gosh. Thanks for allowing me to be here. I'm really excited to be here too.
Yeah. Well, Paul and I, we're excited about this topic. We've done a few episodes around social media, but always having some new ideas. And I think what we find is if it's a week old, it's already old when it comes to social media. So we love to get some fresh perspective. So we're excited to chat with you. So we like to start out with our guest, kind of giving our listeners a little bit of an origin story so they get to know a little bit about you and how you got expertise in this area. So tell us a little bit about how you got into the field of mental health.
Such a great question. I feel like I was destined to become a therapist before I even knew I wanted to be a therapist. So even as a kid, I always found myself, the little side jobs I would pick up, nannying, tutoring, respite care for special needs kids. My very first job actually was working at a kids clothing store. So I've always been drawn to kids, working with kids, the helping profession, even in, I guess, like a paraprofessional role right before I had my master's. It's just what I always gravitated towards. And then when I hit college, really drawn to my psychology classes. And it kind of dawned on me like, wait, this could actually be a career. This thing that has always been like a side hustle in my mind, right? Just something on weekends or after school to make a little extra money. This could be a career. And there's a lot of real transferable skills that I've already learned, how to keep kids on a schedule, how to keep them engaged, how to play, like the skill of playfulness. That's not something that everyone has, right? Or it's definitely something that can be learned. So I got my undergrad in psychology and then did my master's in social work. And then so many years later, here I am with my group private practice. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think the idea that you worked in retail involving kids, that gives you better street cred. Like, I think everybody should have to either work in a restaurant or retail. That's a whole different level of interaction. So that's cool that you did that. I went through something similar. So, as I kind of alluded to, we're going to talk about social media today. Tell us a little bit about how did you get interested in this topic? We know it's everywhere. None of us can seem to escape it, but how did you start getting this kind of focus clinically? And I'm curious, like how you got started in it, and then how have you seen this kind of impacting your work?
I guess I feel like I have two answers to that question. One, I've had my own personal relationship with social media, where I was back in my early 20s on Instagram, although to be fair, Instagram now is a completely different animal than Instagram 15 years ago when I was in my 20s.
Right.
But I was actually reading this mindfulness book. I was in my master's program at the time. And I had this realization, I never feel better about myself after being on Instagram. Like never do I feel better about myself or my life or whatever. So I actually took a hard cold turkey approach. And I was off social media completely for over a decade. And just really noticed a pretty dramatic shift in my life. I did not miss it. I really enjoyed being off. And then in my work with kids and teens, I do a lot of these, talks, right? A lot of parent education nights at schools or podcasts, things like this. And a recurring theme, something that kept coming up that parents were asking for, schools were asking for, was how do we tackle this social media beast that's in our life, in our kids' lives, on our campuses? So then I started to get really engaged with it in a professional level, in a clinical setting, and recognizing just with the kids and teens that show up in my office, just how connected they are to their virtual world through the phone, and then on the other side, how disconnected they are from their IRL in real life world,
right?
Simultaneously.
It's interesting. You're talking about kind of your relationship, and I think we all have that in some ways. And I've had my own ups and downs with it. I'm actually kind of a newbie to social media, just a few years in, and I never had any of it till, just oh gosh, probably 3 or 4 years ago. But it's interesting. I was listening to another podcast today, and I know in the psychology and mental health world, this may not always be the most popular podcast, but I was listening to Mel Robbins, who I don't know if you ever listened to her podcast, but find some of it interesting. And she had somebody on there that was talking about our behavior around social media when we wake up in the morning and before we go to bed at night. And the research of how many people get up and before they even get out of bed, they grab their phones and they start scrolling. And then the research actually showing that can negatively impact not only our day, but our energy at which we approach difficulties in our day. And then the opposite, where they were saying, okay, yeah, if we use social media before we go to bed at night, how it has such, not only we hear all the blue light, white, brown light, all these things, but it's actually the content that disturbs our sleep. Like we'll go to bed not feeling good about what we read. And it was so interesting because I just, like I said, I was listening to it today and I was like, wow, I'm curious, like for kids and teens that do that. We've all had, probably all three of us have people we work with that take their phone to bed and they're doing that. And what's that impact on a less mature mind, somebody who's, has even maybe more vulnerabilities to that. So I find it interesting. I mean, you hear that like kids like doing those behaviors of morning and nighttime and have you heard how that's impacting?
Oh, definitely. And I will say the engineers behind Facebook, Instagram, Meta, all of it, they're geniuses at what they do. And their job is to keep you on the phone for as long as possible. Yeah. You think you're the consumer, the one that's using social media, but you're actually the product. You're actually the thing that they're selling. They're selling your attention to advertisers. That's how they get paid. Yeah. It's a business. We're in America. Like no one's doing this for the fun of it, right?
Right.
So what I really see is like really dramatic sleep deprivation because kids when they're taking their phone in their room, it is just so hard to turn the thing off. That's why doom scrolling is this like term that everyone knows about now, because once you get started, it's so hard to turn it off. So kids are missing out on hours, right? Even 30 minutes of missed sleep can make a difference for a kid. But the kids that I'm seeing and working with, I say kids to mean kids, tweens and teens, all ages. They're missing out on more than 30 minutes a night.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a statistic that said that if someone gets a cell phone at the age of 12, they actually, looking at just use that doesn't do anything beneficial for them. By the time of an average death, they lose 12 years of life.
Yes.
That's
bananas. Isn't that so hard to wrap our head around? Right. That's bananas.
Well, and they equated it to that's actually worse than smoking because smoking took about 10 years of life. So it's kind of think about it in that term. But
wow. Yeah. And then I don't know how they would study this, but amount of increased time on phone results in less time moving your body, less time of physical activity. And as you know, sitting is the new smoking, right? So to speak. How's that affecting physical health? So they're not only losing the time, but how is their physical health impacted?
Yeah.
And, Kelly, I'm curious for you, like with the population you're working with here, like I imagine talking about, some of the negative impact of, social media usage and just maybe screen time in general is a really hard sell. I know it is with, the kids and also meaning that, adolescents, tweens and teens as well, where oftentimes it feels like it's that bridge to connection. And, prior to maybe some of the opportunities for independence, it's something that they feel that they have a modicum of control and in fact are probably far more well-versed than parents in it. And when you're describing your experience there of the self-reflection, like I don't feel better. And then the willpower and to create that change. I'm imagining that's not necessarily the conversations that you're having, though, of like, hey, I want you to take this decade off of social media here, and that you're getting a lot of follow through. But what do those conversations look like, and what's the process there? How is it being received? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that?
That is such a great question. So I guess I would liken it to any other egocentric but harmful behavior. I am not a kid's best friend when I'm telling them to cut back on their social media use. That's not what they want to hear. Just like I'm not their best friend if I'm telling them to cut back on how much they're vaping. It takes time and tact for them to maybe recognize that it's problematic. It's hard for adults to recognize it as being possibly problematic for adults, right? So I try to use a lot of motivational interviewing. I'm not going to be here, lecturing them. The research says blah, 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 says blah, blah, blah. Maybe once in a while I might sneak one statistic in, but I try to really lean on open-ended questions. How do you feel like this is impacting your life? What might your life be like if, let's just say, you had 30 more minutes a day? What would you do with that time? How do you tend to feel after you use social media versus how do you tend to feel after you spend that time reading a fashion magazine, for instance, to try to help them maybe draw conclusions on their own of how they might kind of make behavioral shifts that might help them live a life that they feel better about. Yeah.
And how important is this conversation with parents as well? Like both in the structure they're providing in the household as well as what they're modeling in front of their kids?
Oh my gosh, so important. And so my philosophy, the way I practice as a child and teen therapist, is I really do love to keep the parents involved. I'm not doing every single session, the entire session with the parent, but I always say parents are our biggest ally. And I think one of the biggest missteps that parents of this generation have unintentionally made is we're actually underprotecting our kids in their online world. We're not putting enough structure or limits on their online world and have kind of left them to figure it out for themselves. And yet our kids are so vulnerable. And again, these engineers behind Meta are just so darn brilliant at keeping our attention on there. So I don't think it's really a fair ask to say, okay, 12-year-old, here's this, beautifully designed software whose goal is to keep you on there for every single minute of your waking life, and actually to steal some minutes of the time you should be asleep too. Let's just let you take a crack at it and see how you do at moderating your use. I don't think that's a fair ask for a 12-year-old.
And now a word from our sponsor. PAR's AI Report Writer is an AI-boosted tool that generates comprehensive reports, including interpretations and recommendations based on scores from a wide range of popular assessment tools. Spend less time on report writing and more time supporting students. Learn more at parinc.com/AI. That is parinc.com/AI. And now back to our conversation.
So how do you bridge that with parents? So, a lot of the parents I work with, they have their own issues. I mean, we'll be in the middle of an interview and they'll pick up their phone and I'll kind of have to pause for a second. So how do you bridge that conversation with parents?
Another great point, the parents we're working with might be modeling poor phone behavior themselves to the teens. And they might not be recognizing themselves how their phone could be problematic for them, for their own mental health. With the parents, I do tend to be a little more directive and might cite the research more heavily that we're seeing really dramatically increased rates of anxiety and depression for both girls and boys, but especially for girls. But the rates are rising for boys as well, correlated with increased time on social media. So if the kiddo is presenting in my office, they're they're likely presenting because there's something that the parents are wanting them to feel better about or work on. And if it's anxiety and depression, it's hard to ignore that link that we're seeing pretty clearly in the research now.
Do you, so you kind of previously kind of mentioned about that maybe it's unfair to expect developmentally that kids can really self-regulate this on their own. And so in working with parents, is part of what you do then really kind of talking that developmental perspective with them about what we can expect, and then of course maybe we'll come to what the interventions look like. But is that part of how you approach it with parents, of just developmentally their ability to regulate at those ages?
Definitely. And so on the one hand, we might have parents that are overusing the phone themselves and minimizing the phone as being problematic. On the other hand, I have parents who actually point the finger at their kid and do complain, well, she's on the phone all the time. I can't get her to put the phone down, and almost kind of vilify their 12-year-old. And so in situations like that, I think the developmental perspective is helpful to increase like compassion and empathy. Like, I know your kiddo is having such a hard time putting the phone down. What can we all do? What can the environment around your kiddo do to make it easier for her to put it down? And maybe see the kid as a bit of more of a victim in that, right? It can't be that this entire generation is lacking in self-control. It's tough for an adolescent brain to self-regulate social media use, I would say, with a lot of confidence.
And so much so because, as you're saying, like the software engineers, like it is designed for this. And like, if there's any software engineers listening, I apologize kind of for this comparison, but I can't help but get the imagery of like Hansel and Gretel, like, and they're in the woods and here's this cottage made of candy and sweets and delicious treats. And it's designed and engineered to captivate and to keep them there. So that way, the different product that they're, in the story in that sense, but how challenging it is because it's not something that's neutral. It's something that is designed to have the influence that it is. And yet I don't think it's getting scapegoated, but I hear when you're talking about it's that vilification of the children. It's why can't you put the phone down? And this, why can't Hansel and Gretel not eat the house made of cake, so to speak. And it's being aware of that, I think, is such an important piece. And I guess in your experience, like, are parents receptive to that psychoeducation of talking about the environment and really bringing in that, I guess, this developmental awareness that we're talking about here? And what do those conversations look like for you?
I would say majority of the parents that I work with, the vast majority, oh my gosh, 90% plus, are very receptive and already have an inkling that the phone is problematic to an extent. Parents want the best for their kids. Of course, all parents want the best for their kids. And I think while it may be hard for parents to set limits around phone use, it's not because they don't want to. It's maybe because they don't feel like they're allowed to or something. What I hear a lot from parents is, well, it's already too late. I already gave her a phone. She already has Instagram. It's like, I can't take it away now. There's this kind of feeling like, well, I already, in for a penny, in for a pound kind of thing. Parents tend to be really receptive and really motivated to work on this with the right support.
It also makes me wonder, can social media itself be a benefit here to bringing awareness to this? And my thought goes to hearing this on those platforms, being able to integrate some of social media into the process of taking some space and a break away from social media.
Yes, definitely. And I don't mean to vilify the software engineers who developed this in the first place. I think this actually came with beautiful intentions of connecting people. And I don't think anyone really quite knew what it would turn into when it was first starting off. I think there is definitely a potential for benefit with moderated use. So the number that I see again and again in the literature is anything over 3 hours a day of social media use, anxiety and depression outcomes skyrocket dramatically. So we just want to make sure there's some guardrails around it. And so that's one of the tips I tell parents is we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. You don't have to delete everything. Maybe for some families, that's the choice they make. And I support that. That's probably 2% of the families that I work with. But in some occasions, that has been the choice they've made. But let's just put some limits around it. And Apple has made it pretty easy-ish just through the settings. If you have a family plan, to put screen time limits on your kids per app, right? So you could do 30 minutes for Instagram, 30 minutes for Snapchat or whatever. You can designate it per app. So that's one of the recommendations. Actually, I have my top 4 tips that I tell parents. I'm happy to jump into them now, or if you want to
go for
Please,
it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So that's the one, is put some limits around it. And again, the max I say is 3 hours max on all social media sites combined. I would really feel better with it 2 hours, but some kids are already doing 6 hours a day. So if we're just cutting it back to 3, that already feels like a pretty big shift and improvement. I'm okay with that. The other piece that we're seeing in the research that's really powerful is parents encouraging face-to-face interactions. So we see that kids that are on social media, but also doing things like maybe they're in a Dungeons and Dragons club after school. Maybe they're on a soccer team. Maybe they volunteer with their youth group. Maybe they just hang out with friends on a weekly basis. Kids that are having that face-to-face time, that's actually really protective against the increase in anxiety and depression that we're seeing associated with social media use. So parents, encourage your kid to get outside, to get off the screen. It needs to be balanced and counteracted with some like in vivo synchronous communication, like what we're doing right now. So that's really protective. And then, Paul, you had mentioned earlier, parents perhaps modeling their own phone use, and that may be getting in the way of their relationship with their kiddo. I always tell parents, model tech-free times for the whole family. So maybe that's whenever you walk the dog, everyone leaves their phone at home. A common one is dinner time. Everyone leaves their phone on the table, and parents modeling that too. What I also see with parents for their own phone use is times of transition. So that's when you're in the morning getting your kiddo ready for school or at drop off. That's at pickup when you're picking them up from school. And that's at bedtime. Maybe if they're a teen, you're not putting them in bed, but normally there's some kind of good night ritual, whatever it is. Have your phone away during those times, because those are really key times to build attachment with your kid, tween, teen. And so it really models the importance of the relationship, prioritizing the relationship above your interaction with your phone on the parent side. So during those times of transition, morning, at school, pick up, drop off, and then at nighttime, for parents to be extra mindful of their own phone use around those times. And then my last tip is no phones in the bedroom. So, I mean, during the day in the bedroom is fine, but no phones in the bed at nighttime. So to have like a phone, quote unquote, curfew, 9:30, 9, 10. But so the kiddo isn't in their room with the phone, with no supervision, staying up until who knows what time. And then even before social media, sleep deprivation in and of itself is disastrous for mental health, right? I experienced this myself when I had my first kiddo and up all night. And I'm like, oh my gosh, now I get why everyone's talking about sleep deprivation being so tough. I get it now. So even without social media, we got to be really protective of our kids getting enough sleep.
So, Paul, I think when she mentions the last one, we should have like a big audience clapping and cheering with that, because I think that's just such a key in so many ways. I mean, and even beyond kids, I know we're talking about kids and teens, but we all should probably practice that behavior for our own well-being. Kind of mentioning the podcast I listened to early. I don't think I think it's easy to look at somebody else and go, oh yeah, they shouldn't do it, but I'm guilty. There are times that I'll do something, play a game before I go to bed, and yeah, it's probably something we all should focus on a lot more, which I think we could do more. But I want to jump back for a second. So, both you and Paul had made a comment about not villainizing the the makers of or the engineers behind this. And I really kind of love what you said, Kelly, about, there was good intentions behind social media. And I agree. And I think, I forget that sometimes, like where I kind of go, yeah, there is a good purpose. But, I guess I'm curious, like, in what ways do you find social media maybe to be good for kids that have mental health challenges? Like, yeah, the overuse is part of it, but I think there's probably some pros. And one of the things I really heard you kind of say, and it's I do a lot of work in this area too, and I use the term harm reduction. Like our goal is harm reduction. It's not abstinence. Like that's not what we're trying to get to. We're never going to have a world again without these things, at least not a version of them. So, but I'm curious from your experience, all of these social media, smartphones, all of it, like, can they help kids with mental health challenges as well?
Yes, of course. There is so much increased ability to connect with peers over social media. What's so funny now is the kids that I work with, no one has anyone's phone number anymore.
Right.
But they're messaging all the time. I'm like,
snapping, right?
Yeah, they're snapping or they're DMing. I'm like, oh, why don't you just text so-and-so? They're like, I can't text so-and-so. I don't have so-and-so's number. Right. I'm like, but you talk to them every day. They're like, yeah, we DM. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it does open up a pretty easy portal for communication. So that's a big positive. It's easy to find mutuals, right? Friends of friends. So maybe you meet someone when you're out at a party, but you don't like exchange numbers, and you go home and you can find their profile through looking at your friend's profile, just looking at the mutual. So it can ease the ability to connect with others. And that can lead to IRL, in real life, hangouts, definitely. And I hear a lot of the kids that I work with, they describe social media as a really helpful distraction. And I would say that the effectiveness of it as a distraction depends on the algorithm that they have going for them. So if their algorithm is a lot of, cat memes and fun recipes to bake and, maybe a little, I don't know, animal video here and there, little baby animals. I love the ones where it's like the baby duck becomes like friends with like the big German Shepherd dog or something like that. Those are so cute. I think that has a really high potential to be a really effective distraction skill versus if someone's algorithm is feeding them a lot of thinspiration, a lot of like eating disordered content that might not be explicitly eating disordered. It might not be saying, do this to become anorexic. But what we're seeing now is focusing on healthy eating, clean eating, eat this to fix your gut health, which, we are seeing a correlation with increased social media use and worsened eating disorder outcomes for adolescent girls. So I would say, depending on the algorithm that the teen has, and I do talk to teens, how can you explicitly try to shift your algorithm to where it is more helpful? I think it can be a really powerful coping mechanism for sure.
I think, as I'm hearing your work kind of aligns a lot with mine, that there's almost two pieces to intervening, right? There's this idea of how do we teach awareness and regulation skills around not using it for 6 hours. Let's use it for 3. But the other piece I think is even that you're just mentioning now is how do we teach digital literacy, right? Like how do we know when something's not accurate, and how can we be better consumers of what we access? It's and I'm hoping schools start moving in that direction, like we do in other health related activities. But like I don't know that any intervention in this topic's going to be successful if we don't tackle both the executive function end of why we can get sucked in, as well as when we are on it, how do we access the most accurate information?
Yeah. How can you be intentional with the way that you're using it?
Right.
And to that, I'm curious, some of the conversations, and really it's just probably within the past 3-4 months or so that I've been having where some of my college individuals that I'm working with, so maybe starting to age out of the teen range here, but they talk about, I would use the term decentralizing where they're going for this. And so instead of it being Instagram where it's, I can distract, I can connect, I can follow up with friends, I can, I can stalk someone's profile, I can, do all of these various things. It's that trying to have more diversity in what they're utilizing there. So if it is, I'm trying to text more than I am just DMing. I'm trying to go, and if I'm looking for news, I'm actually trying to use certain, news sites, or I'm trying to actually search specific information rather than just scrolling and consuming. If I'm curious about something, I'm not just going onto this platform and just typing it in. I'm actually going to other sources. And so trying to decrease that sole utilization of some of these social media platforms, because they do become a bit of a catch-all. And then I know I'm guilty of opening up my phone for a specific reason. I found myself on social media. I hope I can remember why I initially opened up my phone. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. Right. But in some ways, it's because there's so many different functional uses that it can potentially create. And then also, I love that idea of the digital literacy and being an informed consumer, being able to access, why are we using it? What's the intention here? So if it's to connect, do I feel connected afterwards? If it's to be informed, do I feel informed afterwards? And I can't help but think back to your comment, about what maybe got you off social media is I don't feel better after this, and working to just bring that level of self-awareness of why am I using this? And is it functional or effective? And again, I think social media is so great at filling so many boxes that we don't really stop and consider hey, is it an effective news source? And possibly, but if I can scroll and I get two completely different takes on the same, is this effective, or do I need to go to a third party that's a bit more of a neutral view or neutral lens? And just trying to decrease that over reliance on a sole source there. Has that been a conversation that you've come across at all in terms of that decentralizing?
I love that you bring this up. I just had this conversation with a young adult client maybe just last week. And this is, I think, particularly relevant given our political climate. And she has been struggling with a lot of anxiety around current events, which is not a new thing, right? This is a really common source of anxiety now. And we were talking, and she has a really strong personal value of I want to be informed, which I think a lot of people want to be informed, right? She's like, I don't want to just ostrich and not know anything. I want to have a sense of what's going on. And we were looking at where is she getting her news content, and kind of looking at what are the pros and cons of getting your news on Instagram, which prioritizes, and I guess I'll say any social media site, right? This isn't exclusive to Instagram, but any social media site that prioritizes short form content, which is 3 to 5 second video clips. And if you're spending 30 minutes digesting news and short form content, you're being exposed to possibly 200 worst case scenarios in such a condensed period of time. I'm getting anxious just talking about that. That sounds awful. Versus, what if you were to spend that same 30 minutes looking at CNN, reading CNN, and you're going to get probably a greater breadth of the depth of the information you consume is going to be a bit deeper, and you're not going to be exposed to the volume of worst case outcomes is going to be less. And let's try that out and see if that helps you feel like you're both being informed and also not feeling like you're in a state of panic.
It's interesting. I had spoken with someone who I think is going to research this. It's not researched yet, but they were talking about, similar to what your conversation was, that how we look at news, even our news feeds on our phone, which we think are, okay, they're the news, they're CNN, they're Fox, they're whatever you want to watch. But even they have an algorithm. Even even they feed you what you want to read. If you read a story longer, you're going to get more stories. So this individual tells me, he's like, yeah, I'm going to start researching. I did this little trial in my office that I told my clients the only place to get news is to go to the web, to your local, pick one local TV station and read the articles, including the national news, because they will cover national news, but only what is important on your local news station, and don't go beyond that. And he said that his clients, after several weeks, actually, with doing nothing else, had about a 25 to 40% reduction in anxiety symptoms, because it wasn't read a story. Oh, you like that one? Let's read another version of that story. Oh, here's another version of that story, where they just would get consumed, where it's, and I laughed when he told me, because I said, that's kind of how I consume news. And I said, I don't remember my grandparents, or even my parents for that matter, who only watched the news at 6 o'clock at night. It was a half hour. It was local news. They weren't anxious about the news. There were still bad things on it, but it was consumed to a very limited amount of time. And I was like, wow, that's kind of a brilliant recommendation. I'm like, I'm curious to try it, but they're looking to maybe research it and say, maybe all of these national news things, it's just going to keep telling us the same thing over and over, which isn't healthy for us either. I mean, this weekend with the whole Iran situation that's going on, I watched a couple hours of news. I saw the same story 5 times, but I still kept watching the news like it was going to change. Then you don't feel good, So it's like, maybe we manage it in those small clips.
That is so interesting. I never thought about that, but of course, like BBC, CNN, Fox, they have algorithms too.
Yeah,
so they want to keep you on their site also. Of course they do.
Right.
So you're being fed the same story. And I feel like this might be a bit of a tangent, so please redirect me if this isn't appropriate. But I feel like that feeds this narrative that I'm seeing the generation Gen Z that I'm working with struggle with, is this is the worst time in history. Like, this is the worst that blank has ever been. This is the worst that social issues have ever been. This is the worst that LGBT issues have ever been. This is the worst the economy has ever been. This is the worst like geopolitical tensions have ever been. And I'm not here to say there isn't really tough stuff going on right now. Of course there is. But before, like when the flu was killing thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, when World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, there was slavery. Like is this really worse necessarily than that? And then so people get so hopeless. The kids that I'm working with, they're just feeling so hopeless about what is the future going to look like for me.
Right. And it's, it's interesting. And I don't want to tangent on all the algorithm stuff, but now that's where my head's at. So, but no, I think what's interesting is I even, as I've started doing more work around this, I pay attention to my own cell phone. And, it's interesting. And this will make this a real benign topic. I was in a store, yesterday and was looking up a product. So I go to Google on Google Chrome on my phone, and I'm looking up this product before I buy it. And then later on, when I'm on Facebook, that product pops up on Facebook. And I go to Instagram and there's a video for the same product. God. And I'm like, how, my phone's connected to so you can't search anything. So, to your clients, so that means okay, hey, if I look something up because I want to know, I want to be informed, then somehow that creates a different algorithm. And if I'm not aware of that, then it does feel like doom. It's like, oh my gosh, it's here again. Oh, it's also here. And wait, it's in my news feed. And then we don't realize that as we pay attention to it and we pause on it because we recognize it, it then says, oh, they like this. Let's continue. And so, I get it. I tell kids all the time, you all have it hard. When I was a teen, bullying only occurred during school hours because no one was really bullying over the phone. That was too much work. Now that stuff, it happens quick. They can go home and do it. Like, so, I mean, I tell parents this all the time. We have to understand how much it is tough for people this age. And it is easy to fall into those traps. And why what you do is, I think, so important to help people understand that and to think about it therapeutically, and that we don't have to be controlled by it. We have to learn how to be a consumer of it. Yeah, I think that's important. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's not going to go away. We just have to figure out how to control it. So
yeah, like you kind of, the phrase I use is like, this is the devil we're going to live with, devil, so to speak. And like, how can we find a way to make it work for us? Be an informed consumer. Sure. I think that's a great phrase to use.
And I'm curious, and this is something I really think it's only come up once in a session before, but I'm being influenced by these conversations in the same way our algorithms are influencing us. And I try to talk, we were on a tangent and we talked about this. I think it was actually a 17-year-old male that I was working with. He wanted to change his algorithm. And so we were talking about and discussing what are the actions and what are the things that he can do. And he was just he was curious and I think a bit bored. And he's like, I want my algorithm to push me towards this. And so he was talking about, again, that intentional, like, what are the things he can do? We were brainstorming, like, oh, if you go to these sites or if you leave your phone, like, what can he do? And he just wanted to see if he could. But I think in a lot of ways, if we can activate some of these pieces, whether that's competition of like, how do you manipulate this or how do you create change? And, if we're going to be fed content in this way, if we can build that awareness, it also, we can learn to doubting it and not trusting every video that pops up on our reel on our TikTok that talks about how this is the worst, because that also, the gift and curse of social media is the outreach, and everyone can be an expert in this and talk with authority. And, now we have apps and AI that can polish it and make it look really, really realistic and convincing. And it's not, someone with a 340p camera, that's talking in their, the bed. They can adapt the background. They can adapt all of these things and speak with authority. And I think probably have the best of intentions, but again, we're not able to really regulate what we're hearing and seeing. So if we can recognize how adaptable it is, it can take away maybe some of the seriousness in which we consume as well. And so that was kind of a bit of his intention there. But in this conversation, really hearing how that there might be a value in terms of approaching that and talking about in more of a competitive way. How do you change your algorithm? What's one thing, by the next time I see you, what do you want your algorithm to tell you? Or what do you want your algorithm to push towards you? And how do you do it? And seeing if they can really go and explore it in some ways. But has that been something that's ever come across for you in the conversations and the work that you're doing here, Kelly?
Definitely. And I love that kind of like gamifying it. Anyone that works with kids and teens, we all know like you got to find a way to gamify everything.
Right.
But what you were sharing, Paul, really kind of sparked in me. This is really a parallel process with what we would do with kids before, is helping them identify who are the kind of friends that you want in your life. What kinds of friendships do you find as being healthy influences, helpful influences, the kind of people that you feel better about yourself after you're around them, and being an informed friend, I guess, in that respect, right? And so we can empower kids and teens to take the same approach with their social media. What are the apps that they feel like are working best for them or not? And what's the content that they find themselves feeling much worse about themselves or the world or the future after they can consume it? And then how can they try to shift it towards something that just seems to be pushing them more towards the life that they want to live? So I've been a child and teen therapist now for, over a decade. And I'll say the past 2-3 years, this is the first time, but I've worked with kids, forever, since I was a kid, I've been working with kids. But this is the first time that I've ever had kids show up in session and they're worried about, these are like 13-year-olds. They're worried about how are they going to buy a house in 10 years or like 20 years. This is bananas to me. Or obviously climate change and global warming and what's the air quality going to be like? I mean, I wasn't worried about buying a house when I was 13. That was like the furthest thing on my mind. And I think sometimes too much news can be a really bad thing for someone that's too young.
I had a conversation this week with a 16-year-old about why should he be paying into Social Security when it's not going to be around for him to retire? Like,
oh my
you're
goodness.
16. Like,
yes.
Let's focus on, like, what are you going to do for gas? And, like, what are you going to ever do? Like that type of thing.
Yeah. Who are you going to ask out to homecoming?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yes.
Kelly, I'm kind of curious with, as you work with teens, you gave us some tips that you give parents. Do you have tips that you give kids, and are they the same or are they different? So, like, if we were trying, like, are there tips for like a healthier relationship?
Yeah, the same tips of trying to limit their phone use. Okay. Although I do call into question a young kiddo's ability to effectively self-regulate their phone use as in regards to the amount of time they're spending on the app. Not that it's not possible, right? But definitely limits on the phone use, and having screen time limits that the parent imposes, I think, can actually be far more helpful. But definitely pushing them to practice face-to-face synchronous conversations. And then I do also like to have this kind of exploratory conversation with them, helping them identify. I mean, there's so much comparison that happens with social media, self-comparison, especially for adolescent girls, boys too, but we're seeing the effects are increased with girls. And helping them identify the profile you're comparing yourself to, that is not actually someone's real life. That is like a very intentional, curated, highlight reel. And let's just try to remember that there's probably a filter on that picture. Maybe they did some like in-app editing. That's obviously the best take out of 30 takes that they took. That's just a little, that's the version of themselves that they want people to see. That's not actually what their real life looks like. It's so easy to get caught up in that. Whenever we're on social media, right, we're probably at home alone, bored, not doing much, and we're seeing content of our, close friends or acquaintances. They're traveling, they're going out to dinner, they're surrounded by their friends, and there's that stark contrast of, well, how am I here home alone when everyone else is obviously out doing all this really cool stuff without me? But that's an unfair comparison because you're also doing fun stuff. Sometimes you're just not doing it at the time when you're on social media. So trying to help them, through these like Socratic questionings and these conversations, pick apart and realize like that's actually an illusion. Like their profile, their grid, it's a very intentionally curated snapshot of pieces of their life. But that's not actually what someone's whole life is or looks like. There's a lot of boredom, a lot of empty lunches when your friends are all out sick. There's a lot of eating a boring bowl of cereal in the morning, a lot of stomach aches and flu and whatever that people aren't posting about, but that all of us experience.
Yeah, no one's doing selfies on the couch eating a bowl of cereal. That's right. Yeah, no, but I love that. I've never used that kind of framing, but I love that. I'm going to definitely still that. The idea of like, yeah, this is a curated part of someone's life. It's as you were talking about it, I was thinking my youngest daughter, who's a young adult, was in Malaysia working at an orangutan sanctuary, which sounds wonderful, right? It's, she's in the middle of the rainforest. It's great. And, she was doing this follow me social media thing, and all of the posts were awesome. Like they're these great things. She didn't take the ones where she was shoveling waste out of cages. She didn't take one, she's having coffee in the rainforest. And it was wonderful. Like it was great. And the other things weren't bad. They just weren't postable. Like that, but I think people's, perception, like, I think I've had some people come to me and say, oh, my daughter wants to do that too. And I said, that's awesome. Like it was a great experience. She had a wonderful time. but she worked. Like she worked 8 hours a day, building things, tearing things down, hard labor. These other things were the curated highlight reel. And it could be a misperception to think that it was just all that. Like there was also hard days. And, so that was a little snapshot. But, I love that you said that because, I think that's a conversation we have to have with kids. Your friends are putting the good stuff, which is okay. We just have to remember it's not all good.
Totally. It's hard for the adult brain sometimes to remember, right? Like if I were seeing your daughter's, orangutan adventures, I'd be like, my life is so boring. I never do anything so cool like that. It would be hard for me to remember, she probably was like doing manual labor and having like maybe a sprained ankle or getting rained on for hours on end, like all the other stuff that's a part of it. It's hard for me to remember that as an adult with my fully formed frontal cortex. And then think about an adolescent. It's so much harder for them to have that perspective taking because their brain just isn't quite there yet.
Yeah, there's no pictures of them pulling leeches off of her when they would, like none of that, right? It's the mosquito bites, all that stuff. But I think you're right. And I think adults as well. I mean, I think it's easy to fall into that, which, I think a good conversation. I'm curious about, can you tell us a little bit about like, what are some protective factors that youth who don't seem to be as vulnerable might have? Like, are there some protective factors that kind of mitigate some of these difficulties?
Definitely. So the two top ones I would say are having the face-to-face time with peers outside of school. So during the school day is great, but having some engagement and some peer relationship could be like a more formal structured community, could be time with friends, but having quality time with people IRL in real life, that would be number one. And then number two, I would say, is having protected sleep, having enough hours of sleep at night. And so I really kind of pass the baton to parents to help me out with that. Like I'll even talk with parents about, let's just turn the Wi-Fi off. Let's turn the Wi-Fi off, like unplug the router. Then no one's on the internet at a certain time. Although now we've got all the phones have cellular data now. So we've got to kind of troubleshoot that. But let's make sure our kids are getting enough sleep, and let's make sure they're engaged in some activity that involves social interactions. That could be a job, that could be volunteering, that could be a sport. There's a lot of different things it could look like, but kids need practice interacting with other kids and other people face to face.
I hear some parents in my head saying, "Oh, if I do that, their mood escalates. If I try to limit these things, I've even had parents who say maybe kids get aggressive when it comes to limits." How do we manage that conversation, or how do you manage that conversation with parents when our desire to do well escalates? And so then they go, it's not worth the fight, but it is worth the fight. How does that look in your practice?
I love that you're a realist with this, right? Or if it were so easy for teens to just hand over their devices, I wouldn't be on here having this podcast with you all now. They're not, it's a problem that they maybe don't identify as a problem. So it's something like self-harm or drug use. They may not necessarily see it as a problem and don't want to change it necessarily. They might not have that internal motivation for sure. I always tell parents, warn them of the extinction burst, that whenever you're making a change, you're probably going to elicit a big reaction in the kid, and that's okay. Let's just buckle up and get ready for it. That doesn't mean that it's failed. And I say, let's give it 30 days. All I'm asking is, let's look at it like for 30 days, you try to enforce this new rule with them that phones are out of the, bedroom at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. or whatever time you pick. Let's give it 30 days. And I'm not a gambling individual, but if I were a gambling individual, I would put money on it's going to get better. You're probably going to have a big reaction the first week and it's going to subside. And there may even be some insight weeks down the road, months down the road of, maybe that kind of helped things for me. Kids get used to changes when there's consistency. When there's consistency and follow through, that's what parents can provide. They get used to it. They get used to these things, right? My kid, I've got a little one, toddler, hated going to the dentist, hated it, crying, screaming. I still took him, and first time, second time, third time. Now he's like, okay, let's go. Right? Luckily, I only have to do that every 6 months, not every night, right? So it's more of a fight that, parents are taking on with teens and the phone, but consistency and follow through, and it'll get better with time.
Yeah. And I like that you kind of looked at that. You mentioned about the 30 days, because I often, maybe a little different language, I'll often tell parents, listen, it's going to be bad the first week. Like, just know it. Like, yep, you're going to be hated. You might see other behaviors pop up. There's a lot of stuff that's going to happen. And then we'll get a little honeymoon period that will happen. I tend to find that kids' response bursts then, usually about the third week. We'll then see that, it's kind of like going on a diet. It's easy for a little bit, but then you start craving things. And I do think that craving comes back, and we'll see a little protest, maybe not as bad as week 1, but it'll come back. And then I start seeing insight. Then I'll hear it from kids and teens who go, yeah, like I slept really good. Like, I really, and yeah, I was able to pay attention in school, like those things. Or I'm just less anxious, or I'm less stressed out. And the other part I think I want to add is, I think we have to help kids understand that they're really not going to miss out on as much as they think. Like, a lot of the kids I see, that they think by them taking it away, all of a sudden their social life might go away. And I kind of go like, no, the stuff that you would see in the middle of the night, it's still going to be there tomorrow. Like, it's still there. It's, and even if you did see it at 3 o'clock in the morning, you should not be responding to it at 3 o'clock in the morning. But realizing that their friends don't go away, that they still have, in 3 hours, you can have really good communication with your social network. But it's getting them to understand that and not fear that they may, like, if I'm not on there, everybody's going to think I don't care, or whatever cognitions come up.
That's another really interesting shift I've noticed with this generation is their sense of what a long period of time is to respond to a message.
Right.
They'll be like, oh my gosh, then they ghosted me. They didn't respond for an entire hour. And I'm like, an hour? Sometimes it takes me 3 days to respond to someone's text message. Like, there's this sense of immediacy. Like, I have to respond within a really quick period of time, or it means like something about the connection isn't as valid or genuine, or it's an offense, it's an affront. Right. So I love that reframe of your friends are still there. They're going to be waiting for you. Like, even if you don't respond right away, that's okay. They're not disappearing. And then I would make kind of the opposite point you were saying. They're not missing out on anything by, not having their phone in their room overnight. You could even argue, but they're missing out on a lot by being on their phone 6 or 7 hours a day, which is what we're seeing. Most kids are on their phone 6 or 7 hours a day. And that's not for schoolwork. That's for like leisure, whether it's Netflix or YouTube or Instagram or whatever. Combo, texting, calling. That's a lot of time that could be spent learning a language or volunteering or hanging out with your dog or just like going for a walk, whatever it is.
And there's a part of this also where when we're talking about like building that buy-in, like it makes me curious if either of you have used this at times. Usually I'll give parents a heads up of talking about the consequences of social media usage for the kids to identify for the parents in the same way the parents identify and bring the kiddos in. And I almost try to talk about that, like less with adolescents, but tweens and teens going into like, the eye roll of like when the parents are talking about they're on their phone all the time, they don't listen. And like, I can tell them 20 times that, where you need to get ready yet. And the eye roll part, I'm like, okay, well, like, let's back up. Like, what happens if you call your parents out? Like they're on their phone and you're like, hey mom, can we do this?
Mm-hmm.
Mom, like, it's like in that way, it's like, this is the same behavior. This is the same response, and the level of frustration you have, like building that shared experience there. And is that a part of your conversation at all, Kelly? With, again, trying to build some of that motivation of maybe even just a recognition of social media usage and just screen time usage there.
I've talked, significantly about negative mental health outcomes for kids with their phone, but there is also some research on parents being distracted by their phone. And I think the number is like 60% of parents admit they are less present with their child because they're distracted by their phone. And I've wondered, how does that affect parent-child attachment? Think, generations before that where there was no smartphone and you're hanging out with your kid, doing childcare, whatever, you've got nothing to pay attention but your kid. Like you don't have this little like mini entertainment device in your pocket to divert your attention. And now, it's something I'm trying to be super mindful of myself. I get distracted by my phone when I'm with my little guy, and he'll even say like, stop it, put it down, stop it. And yeah, I think that's a really critical conversation to bring to the table. And maybe teens might have more buy-in, kids, tweens, teens, to make some changes on their end. If parents also can recognize, yeah, it's hard for me too. I get distracted by my phone too, and I'm not as present with you as a result of it. Actually, this is so funny. What my little guy has started saying now when we're driving is so funny what kids say. He's like, Mama, 2 hands. He wants me to put both of my hands on the steering wheel. So I'm not like at a stoplight checking my email or whatever I'm doing. He's like, 2 hands, 2 hands. I'm like, my gosh, my 4-year-old has better road safety than I do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great part of this conversation. I mean, the idea of talking with parents about that idea of presence with their kids, and it's even not with their kids. I mean, I had heard someone speak. It's been a while ago about the perception of eating dinner with someone and your cell phone, and that not even being on your cell phone, that the perception of the people we're with, if our phone is on the table, is different than if our phone's in our pocket. And just because, and I do it. I mean, if I have my phone on the table, I'll click over, and I just habitually, like I'm not even looking for anything, but those simple microseconds of not being present, and what the person across from us experiences when we do that. And so I've been much more intentional in when I'm eating with someone or I'm doing something that I either set it under my chair or I put it in a pocket. And it's interesting. I mean, I like to reflect on when I do these things. I like it better. Like, I mean, I have better dinner with friends and with family, and we have conversations that are fun. And even to a point, I was at a dinner last week and somebody said, "Oh, I want to see pictures of your kids." And I said, "I'll tell you what, on our way out, I'll grab my phone and show you." And I didn't even take it out then. And I think it caught them off guard because it's like, your phone's right there. But I'm finding that I appreciate those moments more. And even with my own kids who are adults. But I think if we give parents those experiences, they'll realize how much their time with their kids change. And, whether that leads to attachment, I'm sure there's somebody researching that. I'm just not aware of it. But, I just see my own connection. And I'll be honest, I'm glad I didn't have that when my kids were young. I'm glad that, worst we had was TV maybe playing in the background. So it's different. But hopefully somebody's researching it. Now I'm kind of curious, but I'm sure it does affect attachment on some level.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the phone and the visual periphery. So obviously, if we're, actively using our phone, or if kids are using their phone in class, we're distracted and less able to pay attention, absorb information. And there's also research, like you were sharing, having your phone out in your visible field, we're distracted. We're not as able to focus. So I make a real point. And for me, I actually associate my phone with work. My phone is like a kind of object, right? That represents a symbol altar for my practice and the work that I do. So I'll really try to make a point of, I will hide my phone in a drawer somewhere at my house. Like I don't even want to look at it. Sometimes I will then forget where I have hidden my phone and I'm like opening a drawer. It's in with the spatulas or something. But just having it out, it really impacts our ability to be present. It's like an anti-mindfulness machine is what it is.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. So Kelly, I think we could probably keep you on here for like 90 more minutes, but we have to respect your time. And so as we're kind of wrapping up and maybe we'll have a continued conversation at another time. But as we're wrapping up, we like to ask our guests kind of a couple closing questions. First one's always the hardest, which is supposed to be the easiest. But if you can recommend some content, whether that be a book, a movie, anything you can kind of think of that people listening to the podcast might have some interest in, doesn't have to be related to the topic. What's a piece of content you would share for people to check out?
I've got actually an real easy answer for you. And you're probably familiar. Actually, I have it right next to me on my desk. The Anxious Generation by Jonathan, I think it's Haidt. Haidt, right? Goes into this in so much detail. And a lot of the ideas that I shared with you all today actually come straight from his book. So really revolutionizes the way we're looking at screen time use for our kiddos and how it's impacting their development. Amazing read. So I would highly recommend that.
Yeah, amazing read. And not that we want people to watch YouTube videos, but he also has some really great YouTube videos. He has these great little clips from his book that I think are good. Last question. We ask for 3 takeaways. So if there's 3 things you would like listeners to kind of walk away with based on our topic today, what are 3 takeaways you would like them to have?
I'll give you my 4 top tips for parents, right? So it's kind of general rules of thumb. If you're trying to manage social media use with your kids, tweens, teens, think about putting some kind of parental controls or some kind of limits around the phone use. That magic number is we don't want to exceed 3 hours a day because that's when we see outcomes dramatically skyrocket. Increasing and encouraging face-to-face time as one of the top protective factors. Having the family model tech-free times, and that could be designated little time slots throughout the day, or that could just be like, generally speaking, having parents be more mindful of their own phone use. And then no phones in the bedroom at night. So having like a phone curfew, 9 p.m., 9:30, 10, 11. Honestly, it could even be midnight. If that's what we're working with the family, I'd take a midnight curfew over no curfew.
Awesome. Kelly, this was great. I love having you on here. Thanks so much for taking time to be with us today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
Truly, Kelly, thank you so much. And, if our listeners are interested in, following you or hearing more about what you're doing, is there anywhere they can go to, whether that's social media or not, to stay up to date with what you have going on here?
Yeah, the best place to learn about me and my practice is at our website. So my practice is La Jolla Therapy Center. It's in San Diego, California. And the website is La Jolla, that's LAJOLLA, therapycenter.com.
Certainly hoping they take the opportunity to check that out. And if you're a licensed clinician and would like to use this information, please head over to www.psychedpractice.com or check the show notes for a link to purchase the accompanying exam for continuing education. If you're interested in hearing more or staying up to date with what's going on for Psyched to Practice, you can visit our website or follow us on all major social media by searching Psyched to Practice. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well, stay psyched.